Welcome back to part 2 of our series on word tables, where today we are going to look at the layout contextual tab that is found on the right side of the ribbon. And as we go through our examples today, we are going to select rows and columns and the entire table. We're going to insert and delete rows and columns, and we're also going to look at those insert controls that let you, just as you're on the table, insert rows and columns. And then we're going to do some fancy things like make sure that the header row appears on the top of every page. We're going to do some math, and we're going to convert our table to text. And last but not least, we're also going to do some sorting of the contents of that table. So hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and let's get started looking at that Layout Contextual tab. As we look at our example today, we can see that it just has some names and addresses. And to edit this table, I want to click just anywhere in the table. As soon as I click on the table, if I look at the ribbon and go to the right, I can see that I have two contextual tabs, Table Design and Layout, which is at the far right. Now that is not to be confused with, as I go to the left, you can see that just to the right of Design, there is another Layout tab, but that's just for Word in general and not for tables specifically. So if I want to affect tables, I always want to come to the far right to that Layout tab and click on it. Now starting at the left of this tab, we have a Select button, and you'll notice that I can select a cell, a column, a row, or a table. So let me just again click here and let's select a cell and see if we can see if there's a way to tell that. And yes, there is. We have this kind of gray background. All right, well then let me undo that. And then we'll go back to select, and let's see what happens when I select a column. And that's a way to do that. And I'll just click off. Let's go back to select and select a row, and it selects the row where I've clicked. So if I decide to click someplace else and select a row, then that row becomes the highlighted one with the kind of gray background. And then my last choice here is to select the table, and I can click and select the entire table. Now, one of the interesting things that we can find is that when we click on our table and we make sure that we're in that Layout tab, that also kind of on the left-hand side is the eraser, where I can click on the eraser. And what the eraser does is that it merges cells, but it may not merge them quite as you would predict. So let me, for example, erase this line that's between state and zip. And notice how state and zip are now one above the other. And if I go to the Home tab and look at the Show Hide button, it shows me that instead of having a tab, which was probably the divider between state and zip, I now have a paragraph mark that still kind of separates state and zip. And so I would need to do some editing to make that show up potentially the way I want it to. So something to keep in mind, that even though the eraser merges cells, it may not merge them quite as you would suspect. And then let me undo that eraser. Now let's look at the buttons just to the right of the eraser button, and those have to do with deleting cells, rows, columns, or the entire table, or inserting rows and columns as they are needed. You could do the same thing with a right click, but you may find that if you use a right click to insert and delete rows and columns, that sometimes there are just more steps involved using that right click. So let's see how it looks if we use the delete button instead. For our example, let's say that Jessica McLean has left the group. So we'll click just on her name. Notice that I'm not selecting the entire row, for example. And then I can go to the delete button and its drop down, and I can select delete the row, and that row is just gone. Now I'm going to undo because I really would like to kind of keep her. Another possibility is that we may need to insert a new person above Ralph Todd or below Ralph Todd. So let's do both. Let's click on Ralph here and insert above. Then I'll click on Ralph again and I'll insert below. So very easy to do. Now I might also decide that I want to insert some new columns. So I'm going to click on name, and I want to add a phone column between name and street. So I'll insert right, and here is my blank column. Now it could also be that I've decided that, I've only really left one line for the street address, and sometimes people have a care of, or they have a suite number or something like that, where I need to have maybe a second column. So I'm going to click in city, and here I'm just going to insert left and add another column. So these buttons in the rows and columns group can just be so helpful, and it is just kind of really slick how they work. I've now reset our table because there is something else that I would like to show you, and that is the insert controls. Now they don't delete, but sometimes you just need to insert a row or a column. The thing is, your mouse needs to be in just the right place for that to work. So let me click in the table here, and then as I move out to the left-hand side of that table, I'm really kind of out of the table just a bit, you can see that I get a little plus sign inside a circle. And what this will let me do, because you can also see as you follow from that plus sign, that the grid line, the dividing line between Angela Coy and Ralph Todd here, has turned into sort of a gray line instead of the default black. So I can click on that plus sign. Actually, it's kind of blue now. We can click on that plus sign, and it adds a row. Now you can do the same sort of thing if you want to add a column. So let me again kind of click on my table here, and this time I'm going to rest my mouse on the grid line between name and street, but notice that I need to move up above the table for that plus sign to show, and then I get that kind of gray or blue, depending, line, and when I click on the plus sign, it adds in a new column. So insert controls are just a really nice, handy, somewhat fast way to add rows and columns. I've now moved below our first example table here, and we're going to quickly add a second one. So we're going to go to Insert, Table, and I only want 4 cells for my example, so I'll select those 4 cells. And then I'm going to type an initial letter, and then I'm going to type a word that starts with that letter. So obviously this is a table for, say, someone who's learning to read. And then I'm going to tab over and type a B, and then a C, and then a D. And let's say that after I type this all in, I'm not so happy that each one of those cells is exactly the same width, which is sort of the default when you create tables. It's going to try to have a consistent cell width. What we can do then is, if we don't like that, is we can go to the Layout tab, and to the right of rows and columns, we're going to go to the Auto Fit button and click on the drop down. Now we already have this fixed column width, they're all the same. What we want to do is auto fit the contents. So this means that the columns are only going to be as wide as the widest entry. So we'll click on that, and now our table has adjusted so that the cells are just more the size of the text entries. If you're trying to save space on a page, this can be a really great tool. Let's move back to the first example table, and in the ribbon, go to the right of the Auto Fit button to look at the Distribute Rows and Distribute Columns buttons. And let's first of all take a look, maybe a more careful look, at our table. So while most of the entries are just one line within a cell, you'll notice that Street is, for several of the cells, 2 lines. And so let's look at what distributing rows does. Let's click on that. And now notice that it's widened out each one of the rows so that they are all the same height of 2 lines instead of just 1. So that really helps you make your table more symmetrical if that is something that you are interested in doing. Now it also has distribute columns. Let's click on that and see what it does. So now what it has tried to do is make all of the columns the same width. Well, I'm not as in love with that, so let's in fact undo that one. And let's in fact fix this street address a little bit here by widening out our columns. Yeah, I kind of like that. Makes it a little more readable, doesn't it? Just to the right of the Distribute buttons, we have an alignment group, and we're going to look mainly at these first 9 buttons that help you align the text within a cell. Now, if you have just one line of text and the grid lines are very close to that one line, then this probably is something that you won't need to do. But since we do have extra space within all of these cells, let's look at aligning them a little bit differently. And as we look at these buttons, we can see that the lower 3 show that the text is in the lower portion of the cell, and that you could align the text either left, center, or right, keeping it in the lower portion of that cell. Then these middle buttons show that the text is going to be in the middle vertically of the cell, but also aligned left, center, or right. And then as we go to the top, we could align these texts to the top of the cell, and it even shows that's the way it is now, and left aligned, or we could keep it at the top, but centered or right aligned. Well, just so that we can see how this works, we're going to come down to this middle button that is centered both vertically and horizontally. But first of all, we need to select the table. So let me select the entire table here, and then go back to this middle button and click. And while this maybe isn't exactly what I would do for a large table, depending, maybe if you're making a poster, this would make perfect sense. So now all of the text is centered vertically and horizontally. I've added a new example table, or at least the first row of that table, and let's say that it's some sort of shopping list where you buy for a lot of different people and you want to keep track of their sizes and even their favorite color, just to keep them happy as you buy them gifts or whatever this list is for. And it could be maybe a very large list, and so as you tab down, you could add more rows, but let's go to that contextual tab layout, because what we want to be sure to do is check, and if this table goes to a second page, we want to be able to go to the far right on the top where it says Repeat Header Rows. And we may want to turn this on or not, but generally you want to have the headers at the beginning of each page. So let's come down and just add more rows until we get to the second page. And as I went to this second page, you can see that I don't have a header row on it. Now I could add one manually, but here's the problem with that. If I add a manual header, and then I come back up to the first page and I insert a row, then when I come down to the second page, it has moved that header down, and so it's no longer really a header. So to avoid some issues and just trying to adjust all the time, all we need to do is be sure to click in that header row and then go to Repeat Header Rows and turn it on. Now when we turn it on, it gets a background behind it, sort of a gray background. And now as I scroll down, you can see that it has added automatically a header row that repeats the first header row, and no matter how many pages I have, it will continue adding that header row in the proper place. If I add or delete rows, that's okay. It automatically adjusts and you don't have to do that manual editing. I've moved back to our first example table and I've removed the blank row and column that we added earlier. And now I would like to sort this table first by zip code and then by name, because we do have a couple of people who might be in the same zip code. So all I do is click anywhere in this table, and then I go to the data group in the layout contextual tab, and we're going to look on the far right here, kind of just to the left of that repeat header rows, where we have a nice big sort button. And when we click on it, we can see that we have a dialog box, and so I can sort by zip. But notice that when I click the drop down, because I have header rows, it is going to ask me what headers, what columns I want to sort by, and it gives me that particular header name. So I can click on zip, and then the zip code it picked up as a numeric value, but we could also say, oh no, zip is just text instead, or it's a date. So I have some different kinds of formats that I can sort by, and then, well, yes, I would like to do ascending. Now after zip, I would like to sort then by name, and again I can select name, and it would be a text value and ascending. And down at the bottom left, if this hasn't picked up that you have a header row, be sure to select header row if you have one, but we'll click OK. And so now, as I look at this table, I can see that it has sorted, first of all, by zip. So I have the 5 O's and then the 5 2's and then a 5 3 and a 5 5. And then within the 5 O's, I have Almonte and Todd. And within the 5 2's, I have Franklin and Heslin. So it has done a 2-layer sort. Word can do a 3-layer sort. So sorting can be a wonderful way to organize your tables and just make your information more readable. At some point, I may decide that even though I kind of like how the table looks, that this information, because of how I'm going to use it or how people have requested it, I really need to convert it from a table back to text. Well, I can do that too. Again, all I need to do is click anywhere in that table, and then with that layout contextual tab, I can go to the far right, and in the middle here I have a convert to text button, so we'll click it. And it's going to ask how this needs to be separated. So do I want to put in paragraph marks? Do I want to add tabs or commas or some other kind of punctuation that would separate the different cells as we see them now? Well, we'll just go with tabs and click OK. And now I have, and let me turn off my show hide button, I now have columns instead of a table, but they all line up very neatly, and I have that same information, just no longer in a table. I've moved to a new example table where it's kind of small, but as you can see, it has 3 items that it lists, and it just so happens that they are being sold over a 3-week period, and even more coincidentally, each one of those items is $10. Well, I would like to find out what the total per item is, and so I will click in this first cell under total, and to add a formula in a word table, I need to go to that layout contextual tab, and then in the very far lower right, click on the formula button. Now, as I look at this dialog box, I see that it has found numbers to the left. Now, by default, Word is going to look above first and then to the left. However, you can replace above or left in the formula with either below or right. So you have different options here with that sum formula, but in fact left is what we want to do. Now when we come down to the number format, we can just accept it however it comes in, which would be sort of a general format, or we can click the down arrow here. And as we look at these format suggestions, and they're really kind of a pattern here, the zeros stand for digits that are required. So if you even have just a 0 as a placeholder, it will put the 0 in. And then the pound signs stand for optional places. So I might not have a total that goes clear to the thousands place, but if I do, it will definitely let me put those numbers in, and it will even add a comma as a thousands separator. If I come down to this format, it will add 2 decimal places to the right of a decimal point. So even though I have whole numbers in my table, if I decide that I really kind of want this to look more like money, well, I could choose this format, or especially this one that even has the initial dollar sign, and again 2 decimal places, a decimal point, and a required 0 just to the left of the decimal point. In this case, it even has a second section where it shows how negative numbers would look if that is what I want to display. So I have a lot of number formats here to choose from. I think I'm going to go with this dollar one. And then I can click OK, and it shows that I have collected $80 over that 3-week period for item 1. Now let me come down and let's go to the formulas again, because I do want to point out, first of all, that this paste function, when I click the drop down for it, gives me a list of the functions that I could use instead of sum, although sum is listed here as well. So not a whole lot of functions, but probably the ones you're most likely to use. And also notice that because I have a number above where I've clicked, it is defaulting to sum above, and I need to change that above to left, because I'm still wanting to just add in the numbers for item 2. And again, I need to select that number format since I want the dollar signs and the 2 decimal places, and then I'll click OK, and oh, that was also $80. Well, let's go to item 3 and very quickly put it in. And again, I need to change that sum above to sum left, and change my number format to the dollar sign, and then click OK. So now I would like to get a grand total of what I have collected. So let's go to the formula button, and this time we are going to keep equal sum above, but we do want to change the number format so that it matches the dollar signs that I've put in for the rest of this column. And then I'm going to click OK, and now I have a grand total for the 3 weeks of selling 3 items. And so while Word is not nearly as complex as Excel, it certainly lets you do what a lot of people need to do when it comes to having a table and doing some sort of math on those numbers. To learn even more, visit mymcpl.org/online learning, where you will find online resources that include Universal Class, LinkedIn Learning, and Learning Express Library. Be sure to join us each week as we present a variety of tech topics. Each week we premiere 3 new videos. You'll be able to find them at 1 o'clock on Wednesday and Friday, or at 2 o'clock on Tuesday. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, or if you prefer, be sure to subscribe to our MCPL MO channel on YouTube, where you'll be able to find our MCPL Consumer Technology Resources playlist.